Hello, BookTube. Well, here we are. after a long time and a number of nudges, gentle or otherwise, I'm trying to come back to my presidential library series, where I go through the United States presidents in order and talk about their biographies in an attempt to sort of maybe point your attention at some that I really liked, or tell you the strengths and weaknesses of some or other. And we're up to the third U.S. president, Thomas Jefferson, who was president from 1801 to 1809, and whose presidency had some major things in it. He doubled the size of the United States with the Louisiana Purchase, for instance. He has a big, impressive monument on the Mall. He has innumerable biographies. And he has firmly lodged himself in the American mythology. And unfortunately, most of the biographies of him aren't any good. I'm talking 99% of the biographies of him aren't any good. Because most of them grapple with the same existential contradiction, the same essential DNA-level contradiction in Jefferson that Jefferson himself grappled with for his whole life, unsuccessfully, because it's not a contradiction that you can resolve. Which is a thing that Jefferson was never brave enough to realize, and most of his biographers might be brave enough, or at least detached enough in time, to realize that the contradiction can't be resolved, but they won't do it. They won't resolve it. They won't treat it in the absolutist terms that it completely needs. And of course, I'm referring to the fact that Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner. The essential DNA-level contradiction in Thomas Jefferson, in his life and in his biographies, is that it's not possible to be a champion of human liberty and also a slave owner. It's not possible to be both of those things at the same time. Jefferson thought it was. A lot of his contemporaries in the South thought that it was, and most of his biographers somehow think it is, and that fatally flaws their work. I mean, it's one thing if you go into a biography of a U.S. president and you're from Cincinnati and you go into it a little partial of Cincinnati people. That's one thing. That can be papered over by your research. Nothing as big as this can be papered over by research, and it seriously flaws almost every Jefferson biography ever written, because Jefferson wasn't just he heightens the problem. There's a problem you have with, for instance, George Washington, who was also a slave owner, but Jefferson heightens it to a degree that no other U.S. president does, because Jefferson was not only a slave owner, he was a slave raper. He took slave owning to the one level more reprehensible than its simple self. And it's impossible to make a person who would rape his own slave the hero of a book. And yet, almost all of his biographers want to do that. And so you're going to notice when you go into Jefferson biographies, especially if you've never read one before, you're going to notice that you are being, not only are you witnessing a kind of severe mental dissonance between the facts on the ground and their interpretation on the page, but you'll also notice that you're being encouraged to experience that yourself. You're being encouraged to abet this procedure. So it makes Jefferson biographies really tricky territory. And when it comes to those biographies, the rough shape of them is the same as we've seen with Washington and John Adams, which is that you'll get innumerable quick, relatively surface examinations, that some of which have sold very, very well. Then you'll get more scholarly volumes that maybe aren't quite as accessible, but that are immensely satisfying. And then every once in a while, especially for the quote-unquote major presidents, you'll get a multi-volume treatment, an enormous multi-volume treatment that covers every single detail, that literally uses every single known fact, every letter, every diary entry, every mention in someone else's letters or diary entries, to present sort of as complete a biography as possible. And that is all true for Jefferson. You get all of those for Jefferson. And the most famous, by far, of his multi-volume biographies, and the best-selling one, and the one that still makes really good reading today, just on a prose level, is this one. Now, I've been working with the iPad here to try and get you to see what's on it, because the initial result is just farcical. The initial result is literally a black iPad. That's what the light reflection in this room right now is doing. So there's a picture on this iPad, but the iPad is black. But I realized that if I tilt it a little, you get a picture. I'm no Isaac Newton. I don't know from optics. But this is good enough to give you an idea of what we're talking about. These are the Dumas Malone multi-volume Jefferson volumes in their original multicolored dust jackets. You don't always see them like this. Sometimes you'll see them without the dust jackets. But this takes Jefferson throughout his entire life. And Dumas Malone was an indefatigable researcher and also a very, very good prose stylist. So believe it or not, these are good reading. So if you want to read a multi-volume, a complete biography of Thomas Jefferson, these will do really well. And then there are a host of modern biographies. I think Joseph Ellis's book, American Sphinx, is probably the one that has sold the most, probably because it's the shortest. They are all much of a type where most biographers today, in the 21st century especially, want to like the subject of their biography. They want to like the person. They don't find the work sustainable, just on a personal level, if they don't like their subject, and sometimes they're beholden to private owners of documents who want them very much to like their subject. And maybe Stockholm Syndrome sets in, I don't really know. There have been many, many, many modern biographies of Jefferson, including one just recently that I reviewed for the Christian Science Monitor, and I had to slap the author around. He did a really good, thorough, conscientious book, but he gives Jefferson a total pass on slavery, which you cannot do. You simply cannot do that. And yet every biography does. So the very recent modern Jefferson biography that I picked to recommend to you does it the least, and also has a very good companionable prose style. Very inviting, especially if you're not, very experienced at reading biographies or presidential biographies. And you'll recognize the book because you've seen it in bookstores. This is Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power by John Meacham, a regular old-hand practice biographer. And when I saw that this was announced, this book, I expected the worst. I expected the equivalent of Ron Charnow's book on Washington. And I didn't get that. It's actually a tougher book, a fairer book, a more balanced book. It isn't the biography that Jefferson needs. As far as I know, I think I've read them all. As far as I know, Jefferson has never got the biography he needs. There's always this moral relativism at the heart of them. There's always at the heart of a Jefferson biography the biographer trying to square the circle that was the same circle that Jefferson tried to square in his lifetime. And it doesn't work. It can't work. You cannot be a champion of human dignity if you own slaves. You can write all men are created equal all you like. All it makes you is a hypocrite if, in addition to owning slaves, you rape your slaves. There is no way to square that circle, period. So a biography of Jefferson has to approach it from that angle, and not a lot of them do. Fawn Brodie's book, of course, would be the one most of you are thinking of, the book that actually laid out, the one that initially laid out in great detail a case for Jefferson being a slave raper. It's also a very good biography, and Fawn Brodie has, again, a really good prose style. But the reason that I'm not recommending it, I do recommend that you read it, of course. It's an important biography. But the reason that it's not on my little list today is because it's sort of focused on, it's focused so much on that one subject that it slightly loses sight of some of the other subjects. Jefferson had a large hand, an overstated hand, but a large hand in writing the founding documents of the United States of America. As with so many important things in life, those documents were heavily consulted by someone from Boston. But still, Jefferson gets the lion's share of the credit, and he maybe deserves it. And there's also, the Lewis and Clark expedition and the opening of great tracts of the South and West. and the iniquities that go with them. Jefferson was one of the first. It was the first president to, on a large scale, authorize the relocation of the people who were already living in that territory and who didn't want to move, of course, because it's beautiful territory. It's not relocation if it's done at musket point. But Jefferson was the first president to get his hands dirty with that. But he also was the first president on a national level, on a serious level, to confront militant Islam. Who knew that that would become important 2 centuries later? Who knew that that would become suddenly a signpost of something else 2 centuries later? And that's all Jefferson. His administration did a lot of fascinating things. And the Fawn Brodie book is a little light on that, especially a little light on his political education as vice president and as delegate and whatnot. That's the reason it's not on this list now. So I do recommend John Meacham's book. And then there's one other kind of presidential biography, the other kind that I mentioned, which is the slightly less accessible, slightly more scholarly, weightier book that maybe isn't so concerned with squaring the circle, more concerned with the details of legislation and political philosophy and whatnot. And there is one of those. It's from, I think, 30 years ago or more. But I don't think it's in print anymore, but it's well worth your time to find at your library or at a used bookstore if you do. And we're going to see if we can make it look here. It's by Merrill Peterson, and it's Thomas Jefferson and the New Nation. I had to get this picture from Amazon because I couldn't find any imagery that wasn't from somebody's collection. So I think the book might be well and truly gone. But it's really good. A very dense study of Jefferson the politician, and not so much bending over backwards excuse making for Jefferson the man. This is a problem with the presidential library that is going to crop up from time to time in these next half dozen entries, unfortunately, because for a long time, for probably 70, 80 years, it was considered sort of dirty pool, or, oh, why are you doing that, or, oh, why are you going down that route, to stress some of the moral turpitude of some of these people when it comes to slavery. I'm not going to do that, and I'm going to try to favor biographers who didn't do it either, because it's not just a lie; it's an enormous lie. So you don't want to be a part of it. But be that as it may, Jefferson is certainly worth studying. On that level, he's worth studying because he pretty much embodies the feet of clay in the American Enlightenment. But on every other level, he's worth studying too. He's a titanic figure in American history. So those are my 3 suggestions to you for this installment of the Presidential Library. If you want Jefferson soup to nuts, the whole thing, then try to find the Dumas Malone. And if you don't live anywhere near a used bookstore that might have them at all, and you don't want to shop online, as you bloody well shouldn't, then you let me know, and I will try to find them for you. I do occasionally see the Dumas Malone at used bookstores here in Boston. And then there's the Peterson book on Jefferson and the New Nation, which is it's more politically inclined, but very, very good, very sharp. And then the John Meacham book on Jefferson and the Art of Power, which is apologetic still, but more bearably so, at least for me. We'll see how you think of it. That one, I don't have any doubt you can find. There are many, many copies of that was a well-treated book. And in my opinion, deserved. It's a really good biography, even though it starts from a fatally flawed premise, as so many of the books on Jefferson do. And so that's it for Thomas Jefferson. Next, and I'm hoping it won't take a year to do, next we're going to do James Madison. And we'll just keep going. So I will see you then. Thank you, Book 2.